And being here, I think we've been doing this all year, but I feel like today kind of marks the beginning of it's really going on. So appreciate you all being here. Let's kind of start with some appraisal updates.
We've continued to meet monthly and have made nice progress, and have our rubrics for general educator and all of those specialized rubrics have been completed. We're now doing some formatting work with them and following back up with some of those groups to just make sure that we have kind of consistent language used across all of the rubrics, and that we also have enough detail, if you will, in terms of giving options for sources that can be used and that kind of thing. So our next phase is focused on the process side of the appraisal process. And so we meet actually tomorrow night with the appraisal committee. And so tomorrow's agenda is, we've already done some work in looking at the appraisal kind of timeline and cycle and deadlines and those kinds of things. And so we're coming back with all of those recommendations for the entire committee to take a look at, and hopefully start to kind of wrap up that piece of it. And then really our next phase of the committee's work will be taking a look at kind of the global picture of everything, rubrics and the process, and making sure we've got that ready to go. And you're going to see tonight on our letter review kind of some thoughts we have about maybe some piloting we can start next year even. So I think I forgot from appraisal committee.
No, I mean, I think the only thing I would add is, you know, it has been quite a daunting task, and especially as we started getting the process a little bit last time. I was like, oh, how are we gonna, we got plenty to go, don't get me wrong. But if your team brought in, last time I brought in some stuff, and they looked at me, I not bring that binder today, but you all brought in those large sheets that had comparisons of surrounding districts. And I think without those materials, that meeting would have felt much harder, because it really made some things clear. So I'm excited to continue that process, because I thought that meeting was going to be more overwhelming than it was. But props to your team for having that set up.
Yep, Dr. Donovan and Mr. Howe did an awesome job of gathering all kinds of information and getting it to the digestible portions for us. So it was really helpful. And yeah, we made nice progress at that meeting. And I think it helped to, you know, you only know what you live. And so I think it kind of helped to also give an idea of kind of perspective of what does the state really require, and how do other districts interpret that? So yeah, we're plugging away.
We are.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, extracurricular academic support. We met this morning at 7 a.m.
We did. So we are just coming up on we had pushed back a little bit the deadline for new proposals to come to this group for this year to be considered. But we've heard a lot of different proposals already, and we're fairly good way down the process of having some prioritization and some things to bring back to this group as far as recommendations for a variety of possible changes to the extracurricular academic support. I know one of the charges that kind of came from this group was to look at that event rate that hasn't moved in a long time, and we've had some progress on that, as well as some other proposals. So looking forward to keeping on working with that group as we plug away.
Calendar committee. I think that was yesterday.
Yep. We've working through the supporting documents for the, I always have to think, 25-26 calendar. Working through those supporting documents to get those ready to be able to push out, and then also taking a look at the 26-27 calendar, getting some feedback there and working on that. So the goal is always to work a couple years ahead. I'm sure everybody has a good heads up on you're out. So we're working through those, and spent a lot of time yesterday talking about the professional development calendar, and that side Jenna Cooter went through fairly lengthy discussion, kind of talking about what next year's calendar could look like, and then trying to get some feedback on that also.
Yeah, and I was really, Jenna Cooter always so thorough, and yesterday was no exception. But I think what I really appreciated about her and her team, the learning services team, is they started looking at the feedback from our district dialogues regarding professional development, and seeing what pieces we can, you know, some things are going to take a little longer to address, but what are some things that we can implement more quickly. And that was very evident. And here are some changes where we would like to propose based on that feedback. So we'll likely be working really hard to get some feedback on some of those changes through different groups, leaders for learning, reps, those kinds of things. That's it for that. Conferences I had on there, and I know we don't have an update.
We do.
Do we? Okay, never mind. I know we have an update. Yeah.
So we have been working hard to try to come up with meeting dates because that's not easy, especially when you're trying to coordinate like 11 people's calendars. And so we have two that at least half of the committee members could agree to. And so the first one is next week on the 4th, March 4th at 5:45. We're gonna meet on Teams. And then the other date is April 14th, same time, 5:45 in the evening on Teams. And so we don't really have a charge just yet. I think that'll probably come through more clearly as we present letters and things like that. But I think it's also good to just kind of meet as a committee and decide, like, do we need to send out a survey? What kind of changes might we want to see in the future, and just kind of get the group back together. And we have a couple new members. I'm new myself, and so yeah, but that's our mini update.
Thank you. No, I,
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and we can just touch base, so I appreciate being able to do that. All right, benefits. Oh,
I'm trying to.
that was last week, the week before.
Something like.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
pretty much every benefits meeting, you look
Yeah.
at usage, and as I mentioned last time, we are trending up a little bit on the usage, which is mostly the high cost, like the larger claims, which clearly the people going through those don't want those either. So that's just something to kind of keep on people's radar.
Pharmacy piece is always a big, ticket and topic that we cover, because that continues to be the cost that is rising the most quickly, and that we also get the most questions about, obviously, when there need to be changes made within kind of pharmacy coverages and that kind of thing. So I think we also talked about the clinic RFP that's out. And so we're continuing in that process as well, and exploring that as maybe an option for another, resource and support and benefit for our staff. So that, of course, it has a lot of different facets to it.
And
So
I don't know if we've been able to mention that. I mean, I know the details are far from being nailed down, but
Yeah.
I don't even know if we've talked about that at all at this table. Would you maybe be able to get an idea of like the vision of it? Because it's really exciting.
So we, as a benefits committee, kind of started talking about, the constant, needs of our staff, and also just the rising costs of healthcare. And one of the things that we had talked about that, might be an option for us is to offer an on-site clinic, which would be in essence a health clinic that would look very likely similar to your primary care physician's office, and that could provide some kind of that basic care for staff that carry our health insurance. And so we have some neighboring districts that have clinics on their campuses as well, and some other public sectors that do as well. And so we felt like we needed to do some due diligence and kind of exploring that, and have worked with Lockton, our broker, in that arena as well, because it is something that can have some really nice impacts in terms of positively supporting, of course, our staff, but it also has some great return on investment when you look at the savings that can be provided, because when you are going to the clinic on site, you're not then going to your outside provider, and then you're working outside of insurance as well. And then that care that you can go and receive at the clinic on site comes oftentimes, and this is part of that RFP process, is oftentimes comes with little to no cost incurred to the employee. And then it also provides some nice opportunities for looking at things like being able to provide some basic kind of pharmacy things. So, they would have a stock of some basic kind of meds potentially that, if you come in and you have strep throat, and being able to give you that antibiotic, I think is what it is, right then and there. And but then also being able to expand that to even social emotional support as well, and therapy and that kind of thing. And we've been having lots of conversations as part of our district dialogues that this is yet another avenue that we really felt like could support that. And that clearly is a continuing area of need for us. So, so yeah, as you said, we're in the really early phases of this process, and I think the RFPs were due back last week. And so now our broker locked and will kind of comb through all of those and then kind of provide us with some of the essential information, because it is a large, there's a lot involved in that RFP, because you could do everything from that just physical health care to physical therapy to occupational therapy. You can just kind of keep going and going. And so we'll keep exploring in that process as well. And I'll keep providing updates, but it would certainly be, an exciting thing to kind of be able to offer.
Yeah, and my understanding in the conversations, this would be like, in addition to, it's not like, oh, you have to go to this.
No.
It would be in addition to whatever the options are through our health insurance.
Yes, yes. And you certainly wouldn't have to change and have, this be your primary care physician. You may decide that that is what you want to do, or some staff may use it for those kind of, oh my gosh, I woke up and have this terrible sore throat today, to those that do make it their primary care physician. So yeah, would it be absolutely optional? So keep you all posted and keep working through that with the benefits committee too.
Thank you so much. I put policy revision on here just kind of as a reminder that we do have that policy revision committee. And if I'm not explaining this clearly, please help me. That it's really looking at more just language that aren't like substantial changes, more just like language changes. So as we go through the letters today, there may or may not be some items that we think could go through that committee. And as we're kind of figuring out how to get things rolling, that maybe could be something we could start sooner rather than later, just because that committee is rather small. So getting those schedules together would be a little easier than, pulling together the conference committee. So not to say that that is a requirement. I just wanted to kind of put that on our radar. Were there any other committees that I missed that have met? Okay. I promise you I'm not printing this every time. But here's why I printed the committee list again. This is the second time in a row.
It's kind of a good thing, because I have difficulty finding this. I don't know if I am the only one that can't follow
Yes,
the files. So that's
I know my strengths, and updating a list is not always it. And the reason why I'm bringing this today is I've had some conversations with Clint about, obviously this group does an incredible amount of work in negotiations, but we know the work is much larger. I mean, all of our committees really help us get to that end stage. So I'm working with Marlene, bless her, to get our committee list added to the professional council website, so that when people have input or questions about calendar, they can absolutely reach out to us.
Nice.
Don't get me wrong, but they would also maybe find somebody that they know to reach out to. So I'm printing it again so that when you find those silly spelling errors that you caught last time, or changes, it's going to be a little bit of work to keep it updated, because I know these committees sometimes switch up. But just appreciate you at some point maybe taking another look, because there have been more than a couple times that one of you have told me a change and I didn't get it on there. So I appreciate you helping me out with something that is not my strength. All right. I believe in terms of going over our letters, we were going to go with our district first. Right?
You share.
Yeah, sure.
I'll kick us off. It's a good segue as we were talking about the appraisal committee. So this
read it.
Thank you. So this is a result of that continued work we've been doing as an appraisal committee. And I just noted in here that really kind of what instigated our discussion on the appraisal within the appraisal committee was just the work we were noticing needed to be done in updating our rubrics and process. We had some rubrics that are, I would say, kind of outdated, if you will, and don't really match jobs anymore. And then we also had feedback in terms of processes being a little cumbersome and confusing, and educators not understanding kind of cycles and how that worked, and also administrators that struggled with that as well. So we really kind of dove in last year and started meeting monthly. And the first thing we tackled was looking at the rubrics. And so we started with our general educator rubric, knowing that that was really going to kind of be the foundation of how we were going to build all of those rubrics after that, because we wanted them to be in a similar format and utilize the same language, that when we talk about maybe a benchmark and an indicator, which I don't think it's benchmark and indicator, but as for example,
Standard and indicator.
Thank you, standard and indicator, that was common language then that we used throughout all of those other specialized rubrics. So the appraisal committee worked on that general educator rubric. And once we had that solidified, we then created some subcommittees that were headed up by different administrators who work directly with those groups of professionals, so that then those rubrics could be created that were really in line with those roles and kind of current best practices and all of those kinds of things. So we have completed all of that work, and we have also, as I mentioned before, done our review and kind of started our recommended considerations for the appraisal timeline and process. And along with that, we have also had a review and identified the platform. And when I say platform from the appraisal, I'm talking about the technology that we use for that. You know, we had some discussion of, do we want to move to utilizing Oracle for this, or do we want to keep it in Frontline? Are there other platforms out there? And really, we kind of landed on staying with Frontline, knowing that we have our professional development within Frontline. There's just kind of that nice synergy there, and had an individual from Frontline come and present and kind of share with us some potentials of what we could do within Frontline as well. So we can kind of continue that conversation. So scroll down a little bit. Our current work is in finalizing that appraisal timeline and process. And so what we would be recommending or looking at having further conversation with our group is being able to pilot that new rubric, those new rubrics and processes. We have had lots of conversation, even as appraisal committee, about how do we launch into a new appraisal system? And I think we were all a little bit overwhelmed with rolling out an entire district at one time. And so I thought this would be maybe a nice way for us to be able to pilot the rubrics and process, and looking at maybe doing that in a couple of elementaries, a couple middle schools, and one of our high schools for next year. And then as an appraisal committee meeting in October, December, January, and February. And I picked those months knowing they would kind of coincide with that appraisal process and kind of the timeline and cadence of when those appraisal pieces are completed. And that way we could be gathering that feedback from educators and administrators who are in those pilot buildings, and kind of keep our log of what we want to adjust and change and make those edits and updates, so that in the following year, in 26-27, we would be able to kind of expand and go district-wide with the new appraisal rubrics and process. I'm happy to take questions if you guys want to ask questions. Or if you have questions.
The next one is professional development, and specifically it's the professional development points. If you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was 96, 97 that the practice was first put in place. And I don't know if it's gone through any revisions. I know in kind of my term on here, I'm not sure we've really taken a hard look at that again. And the simple fact is,
And you're talking about professional development points.
the
that
points
count towards.
that count towards column movement. Because column movement, as we've had the discussions, always competes with the starting teacher salary and step movement. So I just think it warrants kind of a conversation and dialogue with this group, still gathering some data about how much of the points are actually utilized versus credit hours. Is this still the most valued way to impact compensation when it does still, even though it's reduced since in the last couple of years, it's still I'm going to estimate still like a quarter of the staff realizes the benefit of it. Is there a desire to increase the starting teacher salary, which flows through, or additional step? I think we should have the conversation. So no recommendation at this point, but this would be the group that has to wrestle with that. So that's where we put it on the line.
So the proposal would be more of either having this group or some kind of a committee do some deep data diving, not necessarily a proposal for a policy change for next
We may,
year.
depending on, once we get some data about kind of the usage and stuff, and that could be a recommendation to do a dive, or do we want to tweak the conversion factor, or do we eliminate, what do we want to do? So it's a little premature just because we thought we could get at that data quickly. Apparently it's in front, you can't get it out. So sorry, I'm caught a little off guard on lack of data. We wouldn't be proposing anything today anyway, but the intent is sometime in this process we'll bring some forward and have a conversation.
Do you think that would be a like ad hoc committee, or would that be like a salary schedule committee, or we don't know yet?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
I don't know.
Or all of
I'm
the
not sure
two.
we had that conversation, Chris, about whether or not we noticed it up versus calling it compensation because it's a little more complicated with the point conversions and hours that it's considered compensation. Maybe it is the salary schedule committee looks at it. So we haven't set the time on trying to address it absolutely this year until we see some of the usage.
This one is mine as well, sick leave bank, sorry. And so I've been, obviously I'm a part of the sick leave bank, and after our move to PTO this year, and also through some of our conversations and some of the applications that we've had, we have found language within our leave policy, our sick leave bank leave policy, that is a little contradictory. I feel like maybe some things got cut and pasted in there because there's just some funny, there's some contradictions when we talk about eligibility for the sick leave bank. We have some kind of inaccurate language regarding how the sick leave bank balance is maintained. We reference illness and bereavement leave in there. We have also kind of some different references to the maximum number of days that can be requested, and then some conflicting guidance on whether consecutive days of absence are required before an application can be made. And then also under the definition of non-extraordinary, we need a little more detail when we get into that. And so as a committee, we've been able to kind of work through the policy it's written, but we have these constant conversations of what do you think this really means? And we think we have the correct interpretation. And there's some great institutional knowledge on that committee as well. So I've been working with Dr. Donovan as well as Amber Landis, and they really are the experts when we take a look at this in terms of that language piece. And we've had conversations with the full committee as well. And so we're working on some language we want to bring to that sick leave bank committee and just make sure, let's kind of come through this and make sure this is going to really clean up and help us to make sure we're being consistent and fair in how kind of we're applying that as well. So we didn't have any recommendation for making any change in terms of the offering or anything of that nature. It really is just making sure we've got language clean up and that it's There's a lot of it that's just kind of left up for interpretation. So.
All right, policy GBRD addresses staff, faculty meetings, and also special topic meetings. So we would maybe be looking at some sort of proposal that would add some flexibility regarding the special topics meetings, especially. Just to, obviously, if you look at that policy, there's kind of mandated topics, and then there's a process to be able to have those meetings for other topics. So looking at the possibility of adding some language to allow for some flexibility for the topics for those meetings, and just look at what we have those meetings for, and maybe what we could use those for moving forward. So we'll probably bring forward a proposal to add some flexibility to that and take a look at that, see what y'all think.
This one's me, so there's two of them here. This falls a little bit, kind of what Angie was talking a little bit about. There's kind of two policies that, the first one I'll take, I made sure I had it right, drug-free schools. And there's a portion of it that talks about an employee's requirement to report a conviction if they've unfortunately been convicted of being impaired on the, at work, which is obviously not something we want to have happen. We also have another policy that requires, that it's not in the agreement, that requires an employee to report that conviction within 24 hours. So there's just a conflict there. So we just want to make sure that's something we can talk through in there. And then the second one there, that's the policy, and we have an identical policy for our classified staff that provides that any employee of a district staff member, their children can attend school. And the way it's worded now is you have to be a resident of the state of Kansas. And I think the thought is we want to go ahead and make sure that's clear that you don't have to be a resident of Kansas. You can be a resident of Missouri, such as myself, and have your children attend here, which would boost, or we have 5 kids who would bring them all in. Because we're not rolling here. No, but
Hope's not watching.
I know.
The kids moving school.
Go to the Olathe. That's right. Actually, that one graduate next year. Anyway, so long story short, the proposal would be to remove Kansas, the requirements of Kansas residents. So there, and we've already had some applications from folks who are applying to attend school next year and asking about that. So,
They're employees.
They're employees, correct.
And
so, like I said, that's just something we think we have a common interest in. So,
And would you envision maybe these two things being something we can start with the policy committee?
I would think so, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah. As earlier, I noticed we have 3 references in the agreement to the A through E schedule. I know. I think because I was reading that, I thought Megan may have a reaction like that. Maybe Shelby. So anyway. But anyway, again, that's just clean up. And actually, and back to the drug-free schools one, I spent just a little bit of time making sure there's some statutes that are cited and make sure those are accurate. Kind of what I've learned from doing this job for this is anytime you put a statute in a policy, it changes or the numbers change or this, so you kind of, and we all make the best intentions, but if you don't stay on it sometimes. So I just want to make sure that is one example. There could be others that just need to be tweaked eventually. So.
And I know we had found a couple of places and leave that we didn't catch. So I think that maybe some little small projects.
Yeah. Yep.
You're right. We probably could knock those out with that group.
So start off with some.
We're gonna get some
wins.
Check some things off, right?
See if I know how to press the right button.
I thought maybe you had props. Yeah.
What was I doing? Yeah, I was.
We know you don't have it on the floor.
Here.
With the binder and then. It's not the binder.
Relation. No relation at all.
I think the way that we went through last time, as we can do questions as we go along, we can wait to see whatever works for you are, I think will work for us. So again, just kind of wanted to start off with like our purpose, why we're here. We're here to meet every student's need every day. And the areas that we really want to focus on is making sure that we can, in order to do that, rather, we want to make sure that our educators have the resources to meet our students' needs. We want to make sure our educators have a voice in the decisions that impact their work. And of course, we want the pay and benefits that will, attract and retain quality educators. And I know that all of those are shared interests, but we always like to kind of remind ourselves of that shared interest. As we look at some data from our bargaining survey, we had pretty good results from our bargaining survey in terms of, even though our educators are incredibly busy, we had pretty good return on our survey. So we feel like, while no survey is a perfect measure, we feel like this is a pretty good measure of where our educators are. So we asked them in the bargaining survey, and this of course went to all of the bargaining unit members, do you believe you'll be working in this profession 5 years from now? And we had, as you can see there, about 78% of our educators saying yes to that. So that would include any reason somebody would leave, whether it's retirement or what have you. So we know that we want to retain our educators, but we also know that they aren't cyborgs and they will retire at some point. Another question that we asked was, do you believe you'll be working in the in Olathe schools 5 years from now? So not necessarily the same position or the same school, but in Olathe schools. And we had 71, I guess closer to 72% answered yes to that one. And so we know that, again, retaining our educators is a priority for everybody at this table. So our components, we of course broke them up into the 4 pieces that we always see: compensation, hours of work. You all had that on your letter as well. Mandatory items, and we had some permissible items as well. So we'll kind of go through each of those one by one, and Eric is going to help us out with compensation.
So, of course, we think compensation kind of checks all those boxes of attracting and developing and engaging and retaining our talent. And when you look at the survey that we sent to our bargaining unit, it's not really surprising that, everything we talk about around this table is important, but the number one thing that impacts people's lives is what we're talking about, the compensation piece. So our primary piece that we're going to be probably talking about is, unsurprisingly, looking at a minimum of a step movement and column movement plus an increase in beginning salaries. As part of that, I would say we have an interest in trying to maintain the salary schedule without further restructuring this year. I think that one of the messages that we sent out of that salary schedule committee was that the reason for the change was that we would have something more sustainable. So I think that anything we can do to help reinforce that message by saying we don't really feel like we need to rearrange this thing every single year would be helpful for furthering that message. We also have a couple of other pieces. One is to look at, when classes are combined, looking at the compensation for those educators who are impacted by having classes combined. That particularly happens at the elementary level. Another piece is looking at the time and cost for CEUs for our members of the bargaining unit who are licensed by an organization other than the KSDE. So we are, like, our certified educators have kind of a lot of structures built in place through the district that, you know, we're getting a lot of what we need taken care of in-house. Whereas for some of our specialists whose certifications are required, but they're coming from other organizations, they are incurring a lot of costs out of pocket. So potentially taking a look at that. And then our last item there under compensation is just to kind of put forward the recommendations that come out of our extracurricular academic support committee.
Any questions on compensation?
I'm gonna, because I'm the attorney, not an educator. What would be an example, Eric, on that last, with the non-licensed, non-KSD license?
No, I had a really enlightening conversation with an OT at the beginning of this year. And she needs 20, and I'm hoping I need all the numbers right, 20 CEUs per year. I think that's right, in order to be licensed through her organization. And last year, if I recall correctly, she got 4 through the in-district professional development, because not all CEUs are equally difficult to qualify for, but it sounds like all CEUs require another like hoop at least in order to make those PD points count as CEUs. So she had to work outside of the contract and expense, many times they aren't paid for, 16 hours of CEUs.
And I think it's important, it's not a huge group of job categories, but we do want to make sure it's a lot of those specialized. OTPT, speech and language pathologists.
Yeah, this would be an alternative to what I know in some districts, there are like 7 different salary schedules. So when you start looking at all these different titles are on different schedules to kind of account for that, maybe looking at some different ways to get additional compensation those ways. Thank you.
Our next area is hours and amounts of work.
So this is a part where we really like to focus on the talented teachers that we do have already. So kind of in response to the survey, right under compensation, 28% of our staff listed this as their second priority. So pretty high up there. And that is reducing our educator workload so we can focus on students. That is a very broad, but we do have a couple of suggestions. So we propose that professional council and the subcommittee for conferences work together to kind of reevaluate the effectiveness of conferences as they are, perhaps come up with some suggestions on ways to make those more efficient. We would like to review and look at the professional day policy, GDZCC, there's for me, and including in that the elementary scheduling document, so that our educators who are required to miss planned time for kind of extraordinary circumstances or issues with students are able to be compensated for that missed planned time. And our last proposal to address the workload is some of those more specialized positions, such as like CBR teachers, things like that, that have required paperwork that go with their jobs, kind of addressing what that additional workload looks like and how we can honor the time that is required in order to get those things done, much of which happens outside or has to happen outside of the contract.
And a lot of that also being the Medicaid billing has to happen
Yeah.
within a certain amount of time.
A lot of
And
it's
so,
yeah, time sensitive, and so that a lot of that falls into our SPED staff.
Any questions on hours and amounts of work? All right, mandatory items, rather.
Yeah, so that is me. So for mandatory items, again, the attracting, developing, engaging, retaining our staff that we have is always the priority there. The first bit of data from our survey is that our PTO has an overall 4.0 rating, which is not too bad, it being the first year. There were some, of course, like it didn't get a 5-star rating, but Some of the lower ratings included, some dissatisfactions with the complexity, needing to report absences in multiple places and things like that. But there is also, interest in having more flexibility using, the illness and bereavement, for, instead of the PTO days when talking about FMLA. So that kind of rolls into, our next slide of the items that we would like to discuss. And that would be just that, looking at the leave policy in addition to all of the other cleanup that needs to happen. But allowing the usage of the accumulated leave before exhausting the current PTO leave. Did I say that right?
We're specifically with FMLA.
With FMLA leave, yes. Yeah, making sure that you can use what you've accrued before using what you currently have when taking those extended absences through FMLA. We'd also like, ONEA would like to propose revisions to the elementary scheduling document for concerns related to the elementary specialists, in specifically, remind me, elementary, yes, but what was the, oh, that's not leave, that's a different thing. Sorry, my head, I was like, how did that go with leave? It's not, that's a separate bullet item. So yes, looking at the elementary specialist, kind of tying into what Shelby was just talking about. And then the last item, again, not leave, this is a different thing, is the 403B match for the bargaining unit staff. This is to enhance retention, especially with our Capers 3 friends that are still here until we find out otherwise that we're no longer Capers 3. And then also looking at the recruitment piece of talking to those new to the profession educators about the importance of contributing to their 403B as well.
Any questions on the Alright, so our listable items, start with Megan.
So again, we're just looking at ways to keep our highly qualified educators as well as attracting new ones. So another piece of data, kind of twofold here related to educator retention, is that 40% of the educators or bargaining unit members who filled out the survey selected that elevating educator voice and or enhancing educator autonomy was within their top 3 priorities. And so just showing that our educators want to have that purpose and voice and choice in what they're teaching. And then 27% selected that they would like to prioritize safe and healthy workplaces, including supports for student behavior. And that was within top, so 27% of that was within the top 3 priorities.
And then also wanted to touch on some data from another survey that we gave. So all the data that we have shared thus far was from the bargaining unit survey. This slide is a different survey. A few of us, some SPED folks who have given a version of the survey the last 3 years. We had a chance to meet with some fantastic SPED administrators yesterday and share the full survey. But I wanted to share this slide because I think it's really important for us to consider. In our 24-25 SPED survey, we had a 31% completion rate, and that would only be certified SPED staff. So
31% of our certified SPED staff responded
to that survey, which is in line with what we've had the last couple years. Slightly lower, but still a pretty good survey response rate. And one of the questions we asked them was how likely they are to leave their job after this year. And 49% said they were planning on staying in their job next year. 43% said they were looking at other options. And then about 8% said they were planning on leaving. And I think those are some numbers I think that are things we need to be aware of when we're talking about retention, but probably even a richer discussion would be the follow-up question is, okay, so what could change? So only those who said they're looking at other options or leaving got this question. what could change to keep you here? And as you all know, when you ask open questions, you get a lot of responses. But some of the ones that really popped were, of course, reduction of caseload workload, increased staffing. So we kind of put those on the same line because they kind of related, obviously. Support with behaviors, which we know is not a SPED specific issue, but we do see that in the SPED world. And of course, increased pay for additional work. So those were kind of the pieces on the SPED survey that I wanted to highlight. And then Megan will kind of go over all the permissive items that we're noticing.
Yeah, so the first one is just taking consideration of retention strategies that have emerged from the district dialogue building visits. And so the group that has started, they've dug through that data, they've been meeting on that. So hopefully us being able to bring some things forward that came from all those visits. Olathe NEA also proposing a policy to support educator autonomy in the selection of our materials and instructional methods, which best meet students' needs in alignment with the district curriculum that we're teaching. Then again, we would love to propose the creation of a special education professional council subcommittee to consider the policies and practices that support the retention and recruitment of the SPED staff. We know that we've had a group who's been doing this work for the past few years, and we had the conversation of this would be a great subcommittee to add to our list of committees. And then also we would just love to clarify and codify the kindergarten enrollment schedule for early childhood and kindergarten educators, especially just with that change that came forward last year with including our early childhood educators in that process of kindergarten enrollment. And so just adding that language into the agreement so everyone understands the expectations related to that.
Any questions on the permissive item?
So on that last one with the kindergarten enrollment, not really proposing to change what we're doing, but to put more in an agreement.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I mean, there's like a note on the calendar. But there's some other places where it's not super clear who's involved. So based on the feedback that I have heard thus far, what is happening right now is working well. We just want to make sure that it's clear in the agreement that what is happening is what should be happening, right? Like we want to make sure everything kind of lines up. Any other questions? Yeah, again, I know we're all here for the same purposes. We want to keep our great educators here in Olathe, and I'm looking forward to using the feedback from the district dialogues to continue working in that shared interest. I think the meat of our meeting is completed, but just wanted to verify. We have an annual review item coming up in March, and it looks like we have one meeting in March. So I'm guessing we're going to be doing that in the next meeting. But so I just wanted to make sure I had those listed out correctly, because I know at one point I had those two things like mixed up in a previous agenda. So I just wanted to make sure that that was still okay with everybody.
And then we want to take a look at that April 10th date.
Yes.
Brought this forward because we had a meeting scheduled for April 10th, and then Board of Education rescheduled the board meeting from April 3rd, April 10th because of a conflict with April 3rd for them. Obviously, that moved it on to our professional council dates. We probably need to look at dates, hopefully some other time that week, because we've kind of got one meeting a week. So We went back and looked at the doodle, but some of that availability could have changed since that was filled out so long ago. So we thought it'd probably be worth it just to look at calendars here tonight, kind of try and nail something down. So if we want to look at our calendars that week of April
So the
10th.
April 8th, we have an executive board meeting. However, there's also, I think, a SIL that evening, which may cause problems for even executive board having that. So probably that Tuesday, the 8th, probably out.
I think I've got high school selling on the 9th.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, at least separate.
There's
for
an
different levels.
elementary, so.
Gotcha,
Okay.
okay, yep. I was gonna say, my film is
Well,
on
that takes out a couple. That leaves Monday.
Monday.
And
And then, yeah, I'm going to guess
yeah, Friday is just.
Friday is not good.
Yeah.
It's 7.
Here for the 10th, meeting on the 10th anyway.
7th work for you.
Yeah.
7th, you're gone that whole week.
Yes.
Okay.
So. Oh,
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so we're doing Monday.
Yeah, let's do the 7th.
I will reach out to the policy committee and see when we want to get rolling on stuff. I know. No rush, but also you all know how once we get rolling into the meeting, that if we can get some of the, I don't want to say easy stuff, but I'm gonna say easy stuff, we can focus on the harder stuff. All right.
There we
Yeah.